Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and this is my pet gorilla, George. Well, I hope you're happy, fellow moviegoers, because today I am once again putting myself through pure torture to review a movie that I have been dreading to watch and review for a long time. As you guys can probably tell, I am not the biggest fan of the live-action Superman films from the late 1970s to the late 1980s. While I do appreciate the effort that Richard Donner put into the first two movies he did, the rest of the time was just bad writing, awful choices by the studio, and a quick burning hatred I gained for a director since watching the third film. Now you may ask what could possibly be worse than a movie that I hated. To answer that question, you'll get a movie that recently not only took the top spot as the worst DC movie ever made, the worst comic book film ever made, but the worst film I have ever seen. I would go as far to say that. Released in 1987, the movie we're talking about today was panned by critics when it was released, and it killed the superhero genre until 2 years later when Superman's co-Justice Leaguer Batman resurrected it. Now, a film this bad doesn't warrant too difficult of an introduction, but because I suffered through it, you have to hear the amount of pain I went through when we look at, in my eyes, the worst film ever made. This is Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Clearly trying to be politically correct, as this movie was released during a time of nuclear war with Russia, the movie concerns Superman throwing away every nuclear weapon, which doesn't make sense seeing it's how people can make more weapons with leftover materials. Seriously, did the writers think while writing this movie? Anyways, Lex Luthor and his obnoxious Joey Gladstone wannabe nephew Lenny create a new man-made monster with Superman's DNA and Lex's intellect called Nuclear Man to destroy Supes once and for all. Meanwhile, the Daily Planet gets bought out by a rich guy who looks like George Bush and his daughter. Holy Christ, I give up! This honestly is the weakest story I have ever heard. Not just in a comic book movie, but in a movie, period. It has a ton of plot holes, such as the nuclear weapon one I just brought up, no existing flow from one scene to the next, and it makes no freaking sense. And I thought Superman 3 had a weak story. Clearly, I hadn't seen this yet. I am a firm believer that a director's job is to create a cohesive story and fleshed out characters. And if they fail at one of those aspects, they fail altogether. Considering director Sidney J. Furie's other works, which I haven't seen at the time of this review but I know are pretty bad, I am not surprised whatsoever anymore. At least with Lester, I was able to give some credit, but with Fury, not so much. This man definitely has made it onto my list for worst directors, as this movie is a total disaster. What else makes it a disaster other than the sorry excuse for a story? In all honesty, I don't want to talk about it, but for the sake of this review, I must. Superman does have his classic comic book traits, but there is one very sad reason why I can't praise him in this review. The entire movie doesn't feel like a Superman adaptation rather than its own thing. Honestly, that is so pitiful that even Batman the movie from 1966 gets a little bit of credit. That is horrendous to say, but I said it anyway. The other characters are boring, boring, boring! Lois Lane gets very little screen time, looks twice her actual age. Maybe that's due to Margot Kidder being sick or something, but I don't know. And even gets the freaking amnesia kiss again. Because it's like we needed that contrived and cop out of that thing again. The rich guy, Warfield, nothing. Not a single moment he was on screen I thought, this is a convincing enough character to have in this movie. He is pointless, and the only point he serves to the story is to add conflict in Clark Kent's life. That's it! His daughter, Lacey, a horny cow! All she serves to the story is to seduce Clark Kent because she likes him. That is the most sexist motivation I have ever seen. At least Poison Ivy seduces people to get through her evil goals. At least Catwoman seduces Batman to get away with diamonds in order to distract him. What's this woman's excuse? I have always hated the stupid cliche of a woman randomly falling for a guy in an instant and comedically and treated their actions as a joke. It is annoying, it is overdone, it is sexist, it is awful. This is not how you write a character. This is just wrong. Perry White and Jimmy Olsen still reduced to nothing. Just nothing. No purpose to the story. No standout moments. Just nothing. Our villains, Gene Hackman hemming it up as Lex Luthor, absolute worst. The worst adaptation of Lex I have seen. I like him fine in the Donner stuff, but in the theatrical cut of Superman 2 and this, absolute crap and a disgrace to Lex Luthor as we know it. And this time, he is dumbed down to the lowest common denominator I have ever seen a character degraded to, with the abomination and train wreck of a character that is Jon Cryer, who played Alan on 2.5 Men, and also, fun fact, played Lex Luthor on Smallville. Not Smallville, Supergirl, whatever, as Lenny Luthor. Just why? Why on earth is this character necessary? He is nothing but a stereotype of an 80s teenager that has nothing to the plot. The voice he puts on is obnoxious. His mannerisms are insulting. His clothing is eye-grating. His whole character is just awful. In my time as a critic, I have never ranted this hard. I feel like I'm going to put a strain on my voice, but I have to do what I have to do. So let's finish this review. How are the effects? Well, based on my senses in the beginning, the effects are freaking horrible! The film constantly uses the same footage of Superman flying 11 times. Yes, I counted. The blue screen effects are the most obvious I've seen. Superman flying sometimes makes him look like a Ken doll. And the editing and continuity are the worst I've seen of both worlds. Several shots don't look like continuations. There's sped up footage that is painfully obvious. And my least favorite, the filmmakers were too lazy to notice that a woman is brought into space with no oxygen and no spacesuit and breathes. Did they just not care? I have no idea, but easily the worst moment in the film. The music is forgettable. All I remember are the pieces that John Williams wrote that are butchered to death. But other than that, I can't remember a single piece. And the action is a joke. Only 2 scenes that are ruined by the horrible editing and effects. I can't take it anymore. This movie is awful. Horrendous acting, bad characters, incohesive story, forgettable music, and by far the worst visual effects of all time. Not only is this movie the worst DC has made, not only is it the worst film Warner Brothers has made, not only is it the worst comic book movie that has been made, but the worst film I have ever seen. I would rather sit through the entirety of Superman 3 and Batman the movie, or Turning Red, or Onward. Those were the worst movies I reviewed on this show, and they are nowhere near as bad as this piece of trash that deserves my lowest rating I can possibly give it. This movie, with everything it gets wrong, gets a 0 out of 10. Frick this movie! My God, I need a vacation. The good part of the rest of the season is that I can review better movies. So tune in next week when we take a look at a good movie. Which one? You'll see. With that said, my name is Mr. CCS. This is Movie Central. And that, my friends, is a wrap. See you next week. And pray to God I don't get this angry again at a movie.